Hey, everybody, welcome to today's day 16. So the last 2 days, Shabbos and Sunday, had tons and tons and tons of mitzvahs covered, all in the category of idol worship, which also translates into just in general, Goyish ways of the world that are antithetical to a Jew's way of life. So we're kind of continuing in that category, and there's a lot of interesting mitzvahs that come up today. So let's go through them. Number one. Okay, so first one is negative commandment number 35, which is that we're forbidden from practicing the ritual of chover, which is essentially incantations, which is the recitation of utterances that the person believes are helpful for certain things and damaging for others. Kind of like snake charmer vibes, divination with creatures specifically. People think that by getting involved and doing these things, they'll reach a higher level of consciousness where they'll be able to do things that other people can't do. Vilma, nice reaction. Right? Like for example, if you get a snake bite and you say certain things and you'll get healed, all these different kinds of things. Some people will also engage in these things at the hope to hurt people, right? I feel like every kid's cartoon has that person that tries to make potions in order to kill this one or hurt that one. So that's not allowed. Now, just interesting, Rambam and different sages over the time have given different perspectives on this. Rambam says this is all baloney. This is hocus pocus. None of this is real, in a very realist approach. Others say maybe there is something to this. Regardless, it's not allowed. But it's just interesting to note kind of different perspectives of how, over the years, what was discussed, if there's any merit to this kind of, muju situation. But again, regardless, it's a clear biblical commandment against it. And a similar vein, the next few. So we have negative commandment number 38, which is that we're forbidden from inquiring information from the dead. In other words, we cannot seek out the dead, seances, etc. Again, some people say there's merit to this idea, some not, in terms of like if there's even a possibility, but regardless, it's completely not allowed. Also, there's definitely the approach that these people that do encourage and bring this about, they're wicked. They're not coming from a good place. And included in this is sometimes people do things to try to connect to dead on their own. You're not going that professional. I don't know, whether it's like sleeping in a cemetery and fasting for X amount of days just to connect to the dead. Any type of this kind of trying to connect to the dead is not allowed. Next, the 36th negative commandment, we're forbidden from requesting information to a question from one who performs the practice of oath. So there's somebody called an oath, it's a type of practice, and the next one is somebody called a yidoni. They're, kind of black magic, crystal, palm reader type of people. I myself don't know, but I'm not going to go into detail of exactly the difference, but these are two terms referred to in the Torah, these different kinds of I guess these are their professions. One's called an Ov, one's called a Yidoni. We're not allowed to go to them. End of story. This methodology cannot be used. We don't go. So anything that will fit into that category of like a palm reader or, a crystal ball, those are all against. So that was negative 36 and negative 37. Next, we have negative commandment 34, and that's that we're forbidden from performing any act of witchcraft. So again, in a similar vein, black magic, any of this kind of just witchy stuff. Am I feeling guilty right now for reading Harry Potter? I don't know, maybe. No, God forbid, but any engagement in witchcraft is just not allowed. Not allowed. Again, whether you believe that there's possibility of it actually being somewhat, effective or true, or there's something to it. Regardless, we're not allowed to do it. Very, very strong penalties. In fact, if you engage in black magic or witchcraft, which I think only really came to light during the times of the Beis Hamikdash, of the Holy Temple. But again, very often when we talk about the strong penalty, we're really just laying it on thick in a way, showing how anti-Torah it is. That's more the idea of why I would say like, this is a big deal. Not that this is necessarily going to happen to you, but don't do it. Bad news. Okay. Next we go into, it's in the same category of the reason we don't do this is because this is what idol worshipers would do, or this is what they would do, that very, very non-Jewish things, but they get a little bit more interesting and perhaps more relevant. So number 43, negative commandment, is that we're forbidden from shaving the temples of our heads. Okay, any of you been to an upshernish? It's a mitzvah of a 3-year-old boy. It's an actual mitzvah. And why do we do it at the age of 3? Because that's when they start formally entering their the educational component of Torah life. Up to that point, maybe they did a lot of mitzvahs, but the main mitzvah that they did was a bris milah, right, at the age of 8 days old. And they had no idea what was happening here. At the age of 3, there's some kind of understanding, and especially the kid knows it's very real. I had long hair. And I know this is a custom in not all communities, but the mitzvah is the same regardless. I have long hair, we're cutting it. It's a way that you can talk to a boy. You know, you're a big boy. We act like a boy, we dress like a boy. Together with that, we put on the yarmulke and the tzitzis. But the actual mitzvah is that you're not a boy. This doesn't apply to women. A boy, a man is not allowed to shave the side face, right? Okay. So of course we know different communities have different customs, but the idea the same is that the sides of one head, that's what it says in the Torah, can't be shaved. Okay, and again, this is how pagans used to dress and do things, so we don't do that. Yamach Shemam, I believe the Nazis had a similar thing where they would specifically shave the sides of their head. And like I said, this doesn't apply to women. Okay, negative mitzvah number 44 is the beard. We are forbidden from shaving the beard. And specifically, it says it has 5 sections: the upper right jaw, the upper left jaw, the lower right jaw, the lower left jaw, and the chin. And I think because how would it look, but also we don't know exactly where these 5 points are. In general, the approach is a man doesn't shave his beard. Of course, this doesn't apply to women. I do not want to go into a full blast thing on this. First of all, it's not my area of expertise, Baruch Hashem. But the short of it is that the way a man treats his beard is very specific. Of course, we know that there are different opinions. Ethan, stand for the beard. Roll it out, baby, roll it out. Okay, so for bottom line is Chassidim don't touch their beard, any form. I'm not an expert on which shavers are kosher and not kosher, but we do know that different communities have different halachic standards. Bottom line is we treat our beard with a lot of respect, and there's only a certain way that you can, get rid of it, so to speak, or trim it. And even in that, there's a machlokas if certain things are biblical. There's definitely different layers of it. But again, a chassid doesn't touch his beard, and that. Now, in terms of the lip, basically you are allowed to touch, I guess like Amish style, you're allowed to touch around the mouth, upper lip and lower lip. The Rambam says, very interesting, that's tradition from Zaydis. He says, like the elder, that we don't touch our mustache. But we do know that you are allowed to trim it, right? A lot of guys that have beards might trim their mustache. Some not, some bite. But in other words, it is allowed to be touched. Some people say it's an issue with basar and chalav, milk and meat, right? If the milk's on your coffee is still on your mustache, and then you eat chicken and a little bit later, that might be an issue. I know someone who didn't. He was very edel, nice boy. He only trimmed his mustache before his wedding. It was very sweet. So that comes into play. But yes, technically you're allowed to touch your mustache. We don't get rid of it at all, like completely. Not only aesthetically, like that's just not what Jews do, but we do know that people will touch it to some extent. Okay, that's enough of my beard talk. We'll have to get a man on board if you want to know more details. Negative commandment number 40. Here, turn page. Okay. Fun stuff. Welcome to 2023. Straight up, if you were ever wondering the Torah's approach to this, men are forbidden from adorning themselves with women's ornaments. Cross-dressing is not allowed. We're not allowed to wear women's clothes, not allowed to wear makeup, nothing feminine. You're not allowed to wear feminine garments, clothing, ornaments, any of that. First of all, it's, the way, people look at it as progress. The truth is that it's brought down in many places how in the times of ancient Egypt, this is how they behaved and this is what they did. And really we're going backwards. Essentially, it's looked at as promiscuous. We are in a very hyper sex society, and it's, yes, it is still connected to idol worship, but also just the ways of Goyim in general, ways of non-Jews that are promiscuous, right? If something that a non-Jew does, even if it's popular, but if it's not okay, we don't do it And very often, why is that important to mention? Because very often, the only reason we'd be tempted to do it is because other people are doing it, right? Sometimes it's not like we would logically come to this conclusion, or I hope not anyway. But, oh, everyone's doing it, so it becomes okay. So a lot of this is like, just because the world is doing it, that doesn't give an okay at all. We have our standards, and thank God they're good ones. So yes. And then the next one is on the flip side, the feminine, the 39th negative, is that women are forbidden from wearing men's clothes. Here specifically, it talks about men's more like armor or, very like masculine-y things. I guess it's not as tempting for a woman to wear a man's clothes because I don't know if there's anything sexual about that, but anything very masculine. It's interesting how that plays in. Like now women are in the army and stuff, so they give examples of armor, etc. I feel like practically this doesn't come into play as much, but a little bit. Like a woman dresses like a woman and a man dresses like a man. It's really, really quite simple. Okay, next, 45th negative commandment. 41st, I'm sorry, is tattoos. We're not allowed to make permanent marking on our bodies, tattoos. This was definitely one of the ways that idol worshipers worship God. There is a myth that if somebody has a tattoo, they're not allowed to be buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's not true. They say maybe the bubbies made this up so to scare their grandkids from getting tattoos. So in other words, let's use a Don Lekavscha scenario where somebody didn't grow up religious, whatever, they got tattoos. It is something people do. A lot of wonderful people get tattoos, right? And then they grew up later and realized this is against the Torah, and they're not obligated to go through painful surgery to remove it or whatever the process is. If they want to, I know some people want to because it's embarrassing. You're going, if it's in a public spot. They're not obligated though. Like, right, you don't have to remove it. However, it's very much against the Torah. We don't get tattoos. Where it's interesting questions that come up is like, I know, what's it called? Microbleeding, where you like dye your eyebrows. Not dye your eyebrows, you tattoo your eyebrows. That's a question for Rav. I do know one example. Let's say like there's pigmentation. I think let's say when a woman has breast reconstruction, I think there's some kind of coloring going on. I'm pretty sure most rabbis say that's okay. So we're talking about classic tattoos, but it is interesting the different halachic things that come up with this conversation. Okay, next is 45 negative commandment, which is that we are forbidden from intentionally bruising ourselves. And again, this was something that idol worshipers did, but also it comes into that they would do it for the dead, right? And the next thing also has something to do with this, that in honor of the dead, so to speak, we're going to hurt ourselves to show that we're with them. And it's very interesting if you see the contrast that for a Jew, we do cut. But what do we cut? When someone, chas v'shalom, is sitting, Rahman al-Islam, somebody, a close one does, we cut our shirt or whatever it is, because there is a loss, right? But because the Jew believes that the body was just a vehicle, but the soul is the real person, so to speak, and the soul is living on forever. So yes, it's a loss, and we want the soul in the body, but at the end of the day, the soul is eternal, and so we don't have to cut our body to show the sadness and this grief. By cutting the shirt, we're showing that there's grief. But really, really, it's just the superficial part of us that isn't connected anymore. So I think that's very interesting. And then the next one, the 171st negative commandment, is that we're forbidden from tearing our hair from our head, also for someone who died. That's what they would do. They would literally tear hair from their head. Just nuanced, if you technically tear hair from somebody else, from somewhere else, that's fine. We're obviously not talking about shaving or whatever. We're talking about like just for the sake of showing your pain, showing the way of mourning death. This isn't what we do as Torah Jews. In the ancient times, this is what they did as anguish for losing loved ones. The Rambam does to say that the amount of hair is called a gris, which I think is a very small area, like, I don't know. And yeah, so these are very interesting halachas, interesting mitzvahs as far as I'm concerned. Just to review real quickly, we did the type of divination you can't do, can't seek out the dead, you can't ask an oath or yidoni, those are different like palm reader type of things. Can't do black magic. You have to, we don't shave the sides of our sides of our face. We don't cut our beard. Men can't wear women's clothes. Women can't wear men's clothes. We don't get tattoos. We don't intentionally hurt ourselves, and we do not tear hair out from our head. So, l'chaim, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.